The Western History Collections was founded in 1927. It covers the history of the United States west of the Mississippi River from about the mid-19th century to about the mid-20th century, with a special emphasis on Oklahoma and surrounding states, as well as the 39 Native American tribes that are located here after having been removed here or confined to Indian Territory in the 19th century. This particular item is one of our newest acquisitions. We purchased it last year. Many of our materials are donated, but we do purchase some. This is a muster roll from the 10th Cavalry, which was a regiment of Buffalo soldiers. So these are African American soldiers. So this muster roll has the names of the men who were serving, whether they were present or absent, and if absent, why. It has their rate of pay, how much they were paid from the period of April 30th to June 30th of 1872. One of the columns that I found interesting on here is if the soldiers owed the United States government money for tobacco that they had been allowed to use, and that was taken out of their pay. They also received a clothing allowance, and so you can see that indicated on this muster roll as well. It would be an ideal resource for those interested in family history because it lists their names, their rank, where they were recruited, and when. The Wild West shows originated in the late 1800s. They started more in the northern plains in Omaha, Nebraska, with Buffalo Bill Cody's show in 1883. Some of the performers that participated in his show were from Oklahoma. And so it wasn't too long after the 1883 show that some ranches in Oklahoma started their own Wild West shows. So we have advertisements for those Oklahoma-based shows. This one is a poster for the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch show, and it's advertising a performance that was going to be in the 1920s or maybe the early 30s. We actually don't have an exact date on this poster. The item next to it is, we think, a souvenir program from Pawnee Bill's Wild West show. It's a magazine, and it describes the acts in it. The acts are not only performers who were cowboys or Native Americans, but they were from all over the world. And they also used exotic animals in their shows. So these were enormously popular in the late 1800s and the first couple of decades of the 1900s. I think there's probably some nostalgia for some skills that were maybe starting to fade away. Such skills having to deal with the open range, such as horsemanship, shooting, even fighting skills. They would stage mock battles. And these, both the 101 Ranch and the Pawnee Bill show, traveled nationally and even internationally, and it was quite the logistical feat to transport all the employees and all the livestock and all their props and so forth all over the country. These photographs are from the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch collection. We have hundreds of photographs for the ranch in the Wild West show. And these are just an assortment. The one in the upper left-hand corner shows some cowboys. It looks like they're from the maybe 20s or 30s, working with a horse. The 101 Ranch was actually a working ranch. They raised livestock, they had many agricultural products, they had orchards, they had their own dairy. It was just enormous. The ranch itself was 110,000 acres. And so some of the other photographs are from the show. This actually shows a tent set up, and we don't know exactly where this is, but it seems to be in a city. We have these smokestacks in the background. And as they were traveling from city to city, they would send an agent up ahead to arrange to have a 10 or 15 acre parcel of land so that they could have the show, where they generally stayed for a few days. So in the upper right-hand corner, we have Slim Cuskey, who's one of the performers, with his trick mule, Will Rogers. And Will Rogers would have been at his heyday at this time. He was a famous Oklahoman radio personality, an actor, and social and political commentator. He was known for his political wit, so he would have been very famous at this time. And then this one's just a little boy on a calf, I guess honing his cowboy skills. This photograph is of a Kiowa girl named Lily, and it was taken in 1901 at the Kiowa, Comanche, and Wichita Agency. The photographer was named Annette Ross Hume, and she was the wife of the physician for the agency. So anyway, this lovely image is of this young girl, and Mrs. Hume was really good about taking candid shots of people in their own environment, at home or on their front porch or outside, not necessarily being posed stiffly in a studio portrait. She started taking these photographs in 1891, and so this was shortly after photography became accessible to amateur photographers. These are on glass plate negatives. It's amazing to think that this was a more accessible form, because these glass plate negatives, as you can imagine, are very fragile and they're extremely heavy. This cookbook is a souvenir from Aunt Susan's cooking school, which was an annual event held in Oklahoma City throughout the 1930s. Aunt Susan, whose real name was Edna Vance, was a fixture in Oklahoma households for much of that decade. She had a daily newspaper column, and I come across those newspaper clippings in other collections. So these were souvenir books. They have recipes, also some advertising for products that Aunt Susan recommended. The other book is, it was originally a wallpaper sample book, and a lady named Trudy Flanagan Hildebrand cut and pasted recipes from magazines and then also some from food boxes to create this cookbook in 1933. So it's interesting to see, what they ate at that time period and how they prepared it. This journal was written by a Marine who served during World War II. He was from Oklahoma, and his name was Earl Roane Rhodes. I think he went by Roane. He served in Iceland in 1941 through 1942, and so this little journal that he kept is from his time in Iceland. You can get a feel for some of his personality and his wit in his journal, because in one part he jokes about the efficiency of the military. He had just gotten his bedding after having evidently been there for a little while. In 1943, he is transferred to the Pacific Theater, and he serves on various islands in the Pacific. And then he's killed in July of 1944 on Guam in action with the enemy. And it's really moving to read his experiences in his own words, and to be able to capture some of his personality. These two items are from the university archives, which are housed in the Western History collections. I had mentioned earlier that we have the original charter from when the university was formed in 1890. So this fancy looking document is it. It was signed by Robert Martin, who was the Secretary of Oklahoma Territory, because the university was founded before Oklahoma became a state in 1907. The photograph is part of the very extensive photograph collection we have of the University of Oklahoma campus. This particular photo shows Campus Corner in the 1950s, and you can still see some of the same architecture now, like this building and then the Boomer Theater sign, which I don't think the theater exists anymore, but the sign is still there. So it's interesting to see the changes in campus and the Norman community over time. I think they represent well the lives of people from all walks of life, whether they're educated or maybe not so educated. They were working in all different professions. Some of them were teachers or missionaries or lawyers or doctors or housewives. Some of them were cowboys, outlaws, scoundrels of various types. And so we're fortunate that many of these materials have survived, where we can see a firsthand recollection or account of what happened from that time. And it can really enliven the study of history for undergraduate students or even K through 12 students to be able to work with an original item from the time period, which we often refer to as a primary source, rather than working with something like a history textbook. So I think it makes these people from the past, it makes them come alive. We hear their words and we see their face.